And welcome back to The Explainer. Still trying to understand what happened on the floor of the House this afternoon, as well as what is to come. Charles Kanjama, Senior Counsel, and Bobby Mkangi, both still with me. Charles, let's talk about what the Speaker had mentioned in terms of public participation. Obviously, this has been an issue with this Parliament, and this administration, having been accused of not engaging in public participation when passing laws. But public participation in an impeachment process, Charles, is this a requirement, and how does that play out?
So the Constitution says that Parliament must take into account the principle of public participation, both in lawmaking and in other activities of Parliament. So what has happened is because there have been previous impeachment processes that have gone to the Senate, some of the challenges to those previous impeachment processes, beginning with the original ones against Martin Wambora, the Embu County Governor, in his first term, the question of public participation came out. And what the court said is that the County Assembly, or the body that moves the impeachment motion, must demonstrate that it has had some public participation. So what has happened in the past, public participation has been in the form even of questionnaires to the people in that county, for example, asking them, what is your view about the charges? The courts have not prescribed the exact form of public participation. But what is interesting is that since the days of the Wambora impeachment cases, because he was impeached twice and saved twice by the courts, there have been developments in the High Court, in the Court of Appeal, and in the Supreme Court on what constitutes proper public participation. And the most recent development is the decision of the Court of Appeal on the Finance Bill of 2023, where they said that public participation is not just to show that you give members of the public an opportunity to give you feedback. You must demonstrate that you've considered the feedback that you received, and you have given, you have good reasons for either accepting or rejecting it. So it means that in this process of impeachment of Rigathi Gachagua, the Deputy President, the National Assembly will need to meet a higher threshold than has probably been met in previous impeachment processes if they would like the process to be made judicial proof, to be proofed against judicial intervention. They'll need to meet a higher threshold. And the question is, since this is the National Assembly, is the public participation meant to happen in 47 counties only, or in all 290 constituencies? What is the manner of public participation? Is it sufficient that you just ask people to give their views? Do you need to have sittings? How do you take a record of those proceedings? How do you process those proceedings? How do you give that information that you've processed from the public to Rigiji, let's call him that, the Deputy President, and also to the movers of the motion, so that they can use it when they are making their final submissions before the National Assembly makes its resolution, either to agree with the motion or not. So those are some of the issues that I'm sure the Speaker of the National Assembly will have to determine in the next 7 days, because he said that Tuesday next week is when they anticipate the actual debate on the motion will take place.
Bobby, all of this is happening, at a time when there is a censure motion, one against the Deputy President that was moved by Senator Danson Mungatana, and then just one we've seen today against the President from Senator Dan Manzo. So what's the basis in law of a censure motion, considering particularly that that is happening concurrently with an impeachment process?
Well, the censure motion's purpose and reason, and I think you had mentioned earlier the issue of a motion of no confidence. So for the censure motion, the main import of it is to, one, rebuke, and for that matter, strongly rebuke the president or the deputy president or a state officer, because that could also be petitioned against a cabinet secretary, for instance, is normally to discuss and to rebuke a particular conduct of a state officer in terms of the state officer being seen to have conducted or behaved in a manner that is untoward the Constitution, the law, or in a way that impugns the office as is canvassed or as is crafted, and especially bringing disrepute and also interfering grossly with the public confidence that is given to such an office by the public. So eventually, the public or the censure motion seeks to repair and to call the stated state officer back into file, back to rail, and asking the state officer to conduct him or herself in the proper manner that that office requires, or the office holder requires, so that it meets the purpose and the public confidence and the public trust that is given to that office by Kenyans through the Constitution. And that is why when especially the censure motion was against the deputy president was presented before the Senate, there was the debate as to whether this is a motion of eventually calling to, or rather that will result in the deputy president being pronounced or the institution pronouncing that they have no confidence, of which the difference and also which comes from the sort of system that we have, where in votes of no confidence, you find those mostly entertained in parliamentary systems where government is channeled through, is operated through the legislature or the legislative house, where you find government, the president or the prime minister and ministers, the deputy president or deputy prime minister are also members of parliament. And because government conducts its business through the confidence or through the numbers that it can garner in the legislative house, so if the particular member, and most of the times you'll even find it's in the institution of the particular government or the entire government where a motion of no confidence is called for, it is actually to test whether that government can master the particular confidence or number or influence to be able to continue prosecuting governmental business. Okay. But when it comes to censure motions, you find that those particularly apply to individual state officers, and its aim is really to rebuke certain conduct and to call that state officer back into line or back into file.
Okay. If we go with that explanation that it is basically rebuking, a state officer and hoping that they get back in line, is then a censure motion or debate moot at this point at the Senate, which could soon be, going into a trial to discuss or decide on the removal of the deputy president? I mean, surely those two can't happen concurrently, can they?
Well, they could, because again, in as much as there are certain timelines that may determine how this motion that was for impeaching the Deputy President was introduced today, and it's taking its own course. It will have its own result. The censure motion, again, before the Senate, has its own particular elements, and also the result is different. As I said, it does not occasion the removal, necessarily occasion the removal of the particular state officer from office, but definitely contributes a lot into the perception and the command of public trust and confidence of that particular office in that office. So may actually contribute eventually to a reason, depending on the outcome and how that particular house votes on the motion, may be a very important element in even contributing to the eventual motion that would lead to the removal of that state officer or office holder from office. So depending on the calendar, on the elements of the different issues that are to be canvassed through the processes, then you could find that the same can move concurrently. But again, as you said, because these are issues that, yes, being canvassed in the different houses of parliament, it is possible that the two institutions, through the leadership, could see how the calendars can be engineered in a way that perhaps one can be held in abeyance until the other is completed.
Yeah.
But you have to remember, these are two different institutions, these are two different processes, and until maybe ruled otherwise by the leadership in terms of the veracity and the grounds and of the issues canvassed, then they should not be affected because one has been proposed in one house as against the other.
Okay.
I think it's in the efficacy, the efficiency and optimal realization of both that should be looked into, and whether justice at the end of the day will be served through the House for Kenyans, because we also have to remember that these are institutions that represent Kenyans. So whether justice is served constitutionally so for Kenyans through their representative, but also for the person or the subject who has been named in those different motions.
Right. I want to talk about how the process then plays out, at the National Assembly. We've seen already the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly pronouncing herself on the matter, Charles, and saying this is a motion she will support, whilst she represents a constituency, that elected her to the House. She's also the Deputy Speaker who might end up presiding over this matter. We've seen the Speaker also speaking about this issue outside the precincts of Parliament. By the way, this is where these statements have been made. And so one would question whether, this is going to be a fair process.
One of the things that the courts have said is that the process in the Assembly, whether it is County Assembly or National Assembly, has to be a fair process. And there is a provision in the Constitution, Article 47, that talks about the right to fair administrative action. Every person has a right to fair administrative action. And the action in the Assembly is meant to meet that standard of fair administrative action. And there are a number of principles that determine whether administrative action is fair. For example, that the decision maker is not biased, has not already made the decision, gives you an opportunity to present your side of the story, gives you adequate notice, adequate opportunity to know what are the charges or issues against you and to get feedback from you. The question of whether they should give a reasoned decision is also one that has been discussed by the courts. They've said not all the time, but many times you may need to give a reasoned decision. So there are a number of criteria that determine whether a process is fair. And the question is, when the Deputy Speaker has pronounced herself on the matter, is she able to preside over the proceedings? Because, of course, if the Speaker is not there, the Deputy Speaker can preside. If she does, that would definitely be one of the issues that the side of the Deputy President will raise if the impeachment motion succeeds with a resolution. They will say that the process was not fair. In the case of the Speaker, he alluded to the matter. He did not speak directly, but it seemed to be an insinuation, and the media houses picked it as a reference to the upcoming impeachment, when you're saying that you shouldn't bang your head against the wall and so on. And of course, that would then be an issue that if it came to the courts would have to determine, had he already taken a position that would impact on his ability to determine fairly. But Yvonne, there is one other issue that I've been reflecting on in the last 1 or 2 days, and I'm questioning because the Constitution is not clear about it. It says that the mover of the motion in the National Assembly should be supported by 1/3 of all MPs, at least 1/3. It doesn't state the upper limit. And it says that the resolution has to be supported by at least 2/3. Right. So for me, the question is, if more than 2/3 have already supported the motion before the fair administrative action takes place, and yet they are the same people to vote on the resolution, is it possible to have a fair administrative action because
they've already made up their minds?
They've made up their minds 2/3. It's not possible to do whatever Rigiji tries to do.
It is possible that during the process, the Deputy President could, give his side of the story, and could have his defense. Isn't that maybe part of the process, and that he could change the minds of...
So that's the question. I think that's the question. Is it possible for them to change their minds? I saw a clip as their names were being read, and the shouts in Parliament was patriot, patriot, patriot. So the question is, isn't this a political process where they're celebrating an achievement?
Already.
Are they going to step back? And so the question of whether it is even possible to have any kind of fair administrative process in accordance with Article 47 in Parliament, once you have 83% supporting the motion before Rigiji is given a chance to give his side, before public participation takes place, is it merely a cosmetic exercise? What the courts have said is that the process of impeachment is both political and a constitutional process that has to meet a certain legal standard. It's not a judicial process. It's quasi-judicial. It's almost like a judicial process. And they've said that the process should not just be cosmetic. People should not just be going through the motions. And so the question that will be asked is, now that 83% have already signed on to the motion, the rest of what will happen between now and Tuesday next week, are they just going through the motions? Or is there a real opportunity for fair administrative action to take place? It's an interesting time. And we are going to observe what happens in the National Assembly, and also what arguments will be raised in court, as we expect they will be. Already there is a case in court, others may be filed. So we will get to learn a lot about how the process should take place from what we'll observe over the next 1 week.
Interesting thoughts. Let's take the possibility that the Deputy President has his way at the National Assembly. I know everyone is thinking, well, that's not possible with the 291 who have signed on. But let's imagine a process where, he gets his side of the story, and he manages to convince some of these 291 who have signed on to this motion, and he changes their mind and this flops. What then? He goes back to office?
It's not just that he goes back to office. He's not left the office. He's still in office.
Sorry, yes, fair enough. He's not been removed.
He remains in office. The Constitution is quite clear that until that day, that there is a finding against you for removal, you remain in office. So there'll now be a political issue. The political issue has already started. Even now, as you can see, the president of our Republic of Kenya has not uttered a word. He's not able to address the media at this stage. He's become tongue-tied. Why? Because there's already some tension between the president and the deputy president as this issue is going on. There was talk of a possible parliamentary group meeting of Kenya Kwanza. It could not take place. So it's like the country is paralyzed. And this situation is likely to continue. But we've also seen our politicians following interests, changing their positions very dynamically. Today they seem to be very much at each other's throats. Tomorrow they are the best of friends. And so it could as well happen, even with the matter of the deputy president, assuming he is not impeached, or after impeachment he succeeds in the Senate and is not removed from office. There's certain possibility of coalitions reforming. Of course, there will be some permanent victims, but there will also be those who are likely, in an unexpected way, to recover the good graces of the deputy president. He himself has been saying that right now he has realized that he should not have been attacking the former president. It was an error. They are now in good books. That's what he's told the media.
Right.
And Kenyans would have thought that was not something to be anticipated in the short term. So politicians have shown a great ability to
that they have
reconnect, to adjust their
based on
supporters,
present circumstances. I mean, I know you're a lawyer, and I'm asking you a possibly political question, but it would be interesting to see if he survives this impeachment, how they then carry on working together for another 3 years. I mean, because certainly the relationship has deteriorated, getting to the point of impeachment. But an impeachment process is also, a divisive one, which is forcing those in the National Assembly and the Senate, if and when it gets there, to make a finding one way or the other, for or against. So it's a divisive process, and you'd have to wonder what would happen if this flops and they go back to working together, and what does that look like for national cohesion, for instance?
We've seen in other countries in Africa that have adopted constitutions where you have a running mate, that there have been occasions where there are disagreements between the president and their deputy or vice president. In some cases, they've gone through a situation of isolation for the vice president or deputy president. Even in Kenya, with our former deputy president, who's now President William Ruto, when there was a bit of a Cold War, he was isolated. And he continued being in government, but people were saying he was not being given any active and serious responsibilities or roles by the president. And then because he didn't have executive roles, he focused on politics. And he was traveling around the country. So this could also possibly happen if we end up in that situation. The current deputy has a lot of functional roles, including chairing cabinet committees. And of course, under the law, he's also the chair of the Intergovernmental Forum, which involves county and national government. So he has a number of roles he's been given. And of course, there'll be a lot of dynamic possible switches in his relations with some MPs. There are some he may forgive, some he may not forgive. Who knows? We can't really get into his mind or into the mind of those other MPs. Definitely, there'll be moments of discomfort, because if you look through the entire process where people are celebrating your ouster, then you survive, it is to be expected that there'll be uncomfortable moments in interactions with some of those members of parliament.
Yeah, that's right. Bobby, tell us what the law says about, a state officer who gets impeached, assuming, so we're looking at all scenarios, right? Once they get impeached, tell us what the law says about their ability to hold public office again, if at all. Just clarify that for us.
Well, if I can accurately recall the particular article, I think it's Article 75, Sub-Article 3 of the Constitution under the Leadership and Integrity chapter. It's a particular article that bars from persons holding state offices who have been removed from office on grounds that are laid out, I think, in a previous article under that chapter, but particularly through the disciplinary process that has been prescribed for that particular office. And as Senior Kanjama had mentioned earlier, when it comes to this office of the Deputy President or under the presidency, you find that it's the impeachment process that is outlined or prescribed for undertaking disciplinary measures for the office holder. So if the Deputy President is impeached and eventually removed from office through this process that has been prescribed for that office, then that article may apply. But we also remember that there is recourse that the particular person may go to court to have that decision of the Legislative House reviewed and until the conclusion of the available redress measures are concluded, until there is an exhaustion of the justice process, the administration process, and the eventual, if onboarded, judicial process. And as we saw, I think previously in the case of former Governor of Nairobi, Sonko, and you had asked earlier where we think this will eventually end up, and it may end up in the Supreme Court, then I think it's up until that final pronouncement through an exhaustion of the provided process. Once that is pronounced, then that's where the determination of whether that person or the particular person, office holder, will have the opportunity to serve the public as a public officer, but more so as a senior public officer in the sense of a state officer. So I anticipate that this may take that course, but until if I may use the terminology, the fat lady sings that metaphor, and in that end, we anticipate that it will be the Supreme Court. That is when we'll find a final determination in the sense of the current Deputy President or any other subject that may be put through a similar process.
Yeah, and that's an important reminder from you, Bobby, which Charles, we can get into. So an important reminder that this goes all the way, and he has to exhaust all avenues that are available to him. But let's imagine a scenario where a person holding an office such as the Deputy President or Governor or others are impeached and removed from office, and that decision is upheld all the way up until the Supreme Court. Can they vie for office? Can they be appointed as cabinet secretary? Are they fit to hold office? Which office are they fit or not fit to hold?
I think, as Bobby has explained very clearly, based on Article 75, paragraph 3 of our Constitution, they cannot hold any state office. And the Leadership and Integrity Act, and then you have the act that relates to public servants, says they should also comply with Chapter 6 of the Constitution. So the provisions of Chapter 6 apply to state officers, but through an act of parliament have been applied to other public officers. So that means that you can't hold any public office in the Republic of Kenya. It's done. And
those public offices are, just so that we understand clearly what we're saying.
State offices are the ones defined in the Constitution.
Yes.
There are senior offices in the executive, in the legislature, in the judiciary, and in also constitutional commissions. All the offices that are mentioned there, whether it's Attorney General, Director of Public Prosecution, Cabinet Secretary, Principal Secretary, Judge, Magistrate, President, Deputy President, Member of Parliament, Member of County Assembly, Governor, all those offices mentioned in the Constitution in Article 260 are called state offices. Yeah. A Constitutional Commission holders. In addition, public offices is anyone who holds an office where they're earning money from the public purse. It's coming from the consolidated fund. You'll find that even to hold office in a parastatal, to be a member of the board of a parastatal, to be a public servant, PS below, director in a ministry, you will be stopped from doing that one because the provisions of Article 75 were to apply to state officers only, but through an act of parliament have been applied to other public offices. So it is basically a career death in terms of working in the public sector. You then go to private sector, you become a business person, you get employment in a private sector organization, but forget about public sector. Once you've been removed from office on the ground of lack of financial probity, on the ground of conflict of interest or those other provisions mentioned in Article 75. And then after you've been removed from office, your possibility of appeal has been exhausted. And that is why Mike Mbuvi Sonko fought so hard after he was impeached to overturn the impeachment in the High Court, in the Court of Appeal, even in the Supreme Court. And when that impeachment was upheld, he was not able to run again for election and even tried to go back to the High Court, in case you didn't know, to sue the Supreme Court because he's saying that he lost his right to a fair hearing in the Supreme Court, and his decision in the new High Court case was dismissed. I was in that particular proceeding. It was dismissed on the ground that you're suing the Supreme Court, was overturning the hierarchy of the courts. Yeah. And I think now he's going to the Court of Appeal. So it is a real career death in public sector. That is why you only fight to the death to avoid that decision.
And what if he resigns now?
Who?
The deputy president.
Then the consequence to him will be one, of course, political. But the second issue is, in accordance with the strict reading of Article 75, he'll not have been removed from office. But who knows what the courts will say in future? Because if somebody is about to be removed from office as a state officer, the charges have been laid out, and even proven, and then you resign maybe when the Senate hearing is going on, the court might presume as done that which was likely to be done. We don't know. Okay. So the point is that if the resignation takes place during or towards the end of the Senate trial, it may also end up not serving him very well. But if he resigns before that, at the National Assembly stage, it's more likely that he will have rescued himself. Because the Senate would have no matter to... Yes, they have not yet dealt with the issue. Only charges were raised against him. Okay. And of course, if he resigns, the motion immediately collapses because it has no validity once he's no longer a public officer. Of course, in the United States, there was a question when Donald Trump, you remember, was impeached twice during his first and so far only term in office. And the second impeachment happened after the elections, where he lost to Joe Biden. And an argument arose. Now that he's leaving office on 20th of January, can the impeachment process continue once he's no longer in office? And in the case of the United States, they concluded that they could continue with the impeachment process because it was for actions done while he was still in office. So I don't know what would happen if that situation was to arise in Kenya. But of course, that would be assuming the impeachment process has begun. Okay. So I do believe that if the impeachment process, which means the impeachment hearing or the impeachment trial, if it has not begun, if it's still in the National Assembly stage, the process is likely to collapse. Okay. Okay. I'd like us to close now. There's so much more we can keep talking about, and so much we will keep learning, and I guess more questions that will continue to come up as this process continues. Bobby, let me hear your final thoughts on where this goes and
maybe just your thoughts. Friday, there's public participation. Tuesday is the day we have the debate, and then, what follows thereafter. Your closing remarks on this and where we go from here.
Well, I guess these are uncharted waters. Regardless of where the origin of this and the intention, well, broadly it being political, but as we get to hear more, if the process continues in the anticipated course, I think it's as Senior Kanjama said, I think it's a learning process also, a test of our constitutionality. And I guess myself and all Kenyans will be keenly looking to see how this goes, because it also affects and how we anticipate the politics of this country, how the presidency and the politics, the mobilization, how in the future candidates will be nominating their running mates, because I think previously there was perhaps the assurance, and especially for those who agree to serve as running mates and eventually deputy president, that there is a particular security in the provision that the president cannot fire or sack his or her deputy president. But now we are coming to the occasion where we can see that probably through political means and use of relevant institutions, institutions, that this may be possible, then it will be a game changer in the long run. In the short run, we'll wait to see the processes and even the determination of how public participation will be conducted, whether the views that will come from the public will affect the intention of the House. There was a question of the threshold that is already been met to support the motion, and whether this will change when a decision around the motion, whether to charge the deputy president or not, will be canvassed in the House, and the details that may come when the issue and the grounds are further interrogated. I think that's what Kenyans will wait to see. But I think around how we mobilize so as to fit and politically electioneering politics in Kenya will definitely be affected by this process already where it is, but also the final outcome in the long run. I think it really changes a lot in terms of the factors and the different considerations that politicians will be putting into regard, and also Kenyans as the electorate at the point of elections and elections for the presidency in the future.
That's right. Thanks for those final thoughts. Like you say, definitely uncharted waters. Whichever way this goes, I think it'll have an effect on where we are as a country, and possibly even the next election, how running mates are selected, on the political front. So thanks for that, Bobby. Charles, your final comments. Also a quick one. MPs, this is a quasi-judicial process, right?
Yes.
But can MPs debate this matter outside the House? Like, will we see them at rallies? I saw the leader of majority cautioning them about how to conduct themselves now going forward.
So for senators, it's clear that they cannot be discussing the matter because they are almost like judges or magistrates when they deal with the Senate impeachment trial, assuming it gets there. In the case of the National Assembly, it's a bit different. It's more political, not as much judicial, but still there's need for fair administrative action. So the expectation would be that they'll be more disciplined in the way they deal with the matter and the discussions they have outside the floor of the House. Yvonne, I'm reminded of a certain book I read some years back by J.F. Kennedy. J.F. Kennedy was one of the American presidents. He served as president from 1961. And before he became president, I think when he was a senator, he wrote a book called Profiles in Courage. And he was referring to certain important events in American history and some of the politicians who had shown courage in those events. And I still remember his portrait of a certain senator called Edmund Ross. And Edmund Ross was a senator in the 1860s when they tried to impeach the American president who had succeeded the Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, after he was assassinated, he was succeeded by Andrew Jackson, and they tried to impeach him. And Jeff Kennedy gives a portrait of Edmund Ross and how in the process of the impeachment trial, he recognizes that he's facing a lot of pressure. Political pressure because his party wanted him to decide one way, pressure from his constituents who had a different view, and he felt that as a senator, he had sworn an oath during the impeachment trial to determine the matter based on conscience and right, based on the law. What is this a criminal offense that has been committed by Andrew Johnson? I think it was called Andrew Johnson, the president of the United States at the time. And so for me, I would like to see the members of the National Assembly, the MPs and the senators, I would like to see whether they'll conduct themselves with that high sense of duty and calling in this matter, or will they conduct themselves with that sense of pure political engagement, like I saw today when they were shouting patriot, patriot, patriot? Will they recognize and appreciate the importance of this process, that the reason why the Constitution has put in place the impeachment process is very different from a motion of no confidence, which is purely a political process. This is a judicial process, and the determination of the MPs and the senators, if it goes in the way of upholding the impeachment motion, could be a sentence of political death, of public career death to a particular individual, not to be done on pure political motive, but for serious reasons. And I also hope that as they go through the process, they'll also reflect on themselves, because none is truly a judge of another who cannot be a judge of themselves. And if they find that they themselves are not able to uphold that high standard, I hope even as they go through the process, there will be certain decisions that will take that will reflect on their own individual behavior, actions, and character going forward.
That's a good place to leave it. We wait to see the conduct of the members of National Assembly and those in the Senate, and to see how this process plays out. You've said some great things. It's also a political process, so I'm sure we'll definitely see lots of politics playing out on that. I really thank you for your time, and I hope we can continue to speak to you on this, because the next 1 week will be extremely pivotal regarding this issue in the country up until Tuesday next week. At a time like this next week will be an interesting date. Charles, I'm honestly asking you to be with us throughout the week, and indeed also next week here on Tuesday, to talk a lot more about this. Bobby Mkangi, hopefully you'll be back in Nairobi, and we can also have you here to just continue to understand this incredible moment for Kenya's constitution. So Bobby Mkangi, thank you very much for joining us live from Mombasa. Charles Kanjama here in Nairobi. We see what happens, next week, Tuesday, tutakuwa tu hapa, see what happens in this great country. Thanks for watching the show tonight. I'm Yvonne Okwara. Our sign language interpreter was Yulan Zale. Good night.